I thought I was gonna be able to do this in one take, but I forgot I like to ramble and go off in tangents. So, okay, the question is, let me do like an outline. So, why the name? Why the sub? Like, what makes it different? And what kind of things we should expect from this sub? I guess. Let's try that. Let's just stick to those, right? So the name non-poetry, I actually juggled around a lot of names. I thought content poetry, free content poetry. That was the one I was really hard set on for a while, but there's some issues with like what does content exactly mean, you know? Um, I also thought method poetry, but again, like, what do you mean by method? What is the point? Is it just like I write poetry using my toes, using my feet? Do I do like a Big Lebowski thing and just like slash it across the room while flying on a trapeze? I don't know. It's unclear. I tried pure poetry, and that one was actually supposed to be a little bit ironic in that, well, the goal was to intuit a pure idea of poetry. Oh God, I have to go into like bullshit. So let's just say I wrote that off. In a similar vein, I also thought pleroma poetry, sort of like undifferentiated poetry, and I guess like related to the Tao and stuff like that for you non-Westerners. Um, yeah, but I eventually decided non-poetry because that's the issue, right? I uh, I discussed the idea of this sub very much at length with username Riley20 because we both have this. I mean, we both have pretensions. Everyone's got pretensions, right, for the things that they like. And I mean, we both have we both have a certain contempt for most of the poetry that we see. Um, especially, especially if it seems like the person has a very clear notion of what poetry is, right? It's almost like too clear. And for Riley and me, well, we don't really have that clear of a notion of what poetry is. We we write and something comes out, right? I mean, it's spontaneous. Like we do like a spontaneity. I also consider spontaneous poetry for that matter. Um, but I think what it comes down to is that sometimes people will look at things that Riley and I write, and and I'm not discounting other people too. I'm just saying Riley and I have talked about this a lot, so that's why I'm mentioning his name. But I've seen this with other people too. So that a poem will be written, and then it will get criticized either for something that's not strictly poetic, like for its content. That's why I consider free content a lot. Like if you have a theme that could be dubious or contentious, um, people would pretty much just disregard what you did with that theme and focus only on that, right? And so um, the poetry itself gets trivialized due to biases. And so it's very clear that people who do that, they approach poetry with biases, and they have very clear expectations for what they expect from poetry, right? They have very clear expectations. Uh, Whether or not they're clear to themselves, like whether they've articulated it to themselves, that's besides the question. The fact is that they will immediately sift out any poetry that has content that they disagree with or that articulates something in a way that they might not understand. Right? I've had people throw their entire conceptual toolboxes at me, telling me that they couldn't understand what I wrote, therefore it's garbage. And maybe it's right. Maybe they're right. Maybe what people like Riley and I do, and other people, especially on shitty poetry, maybe what we do is not poetry. Just to be honest, I don't like most of the poets, especially the ones who really, really do think that they're poets and who think that they're like the vanguard of poetry. The ones who submit to journals and post on the educational subs to tutor their younglings. It's it's very pharisaical. You know, they like to root out what they don't understand because they think poetry is something they understand. I've already been rambling a lot, so I'm going to close it here. But basically, the sub does not try to articulate clear notions of poetry. Um, yeah, so that's why this is different, even from places like the shitty. The shitty poetry still implies that you like have an idea of what poetry is, right? And so you're like being intentionally transgressive, right? Non poetry is not it's not necessarily transgressive. It can be, and that's fine, but it is still about something, right? It's not just irony or satire, um, and it's not just some place to go when you're just like a reject either. It's like, what I told Riley was I only go on the shitty because people told me my poetry was shitty. Not that I actually think it's shitty. And so when I post on there, what I'm doing is I affirm those other people's opinions. And I came to the conclusion after a while that that's not right. My poetry, I do actually really do believe in what I write. Whether or not it is poetry, I'll leave that up in the air. If I say poetry, whatever. But whether or not it is, I do believe in it, right? I do think I am saying something. So, yes, that's why it's not necessarily shitty poetry, because I don't believe that it's shit. Um, yeah, and it's different from the highfalutin, hoity-toity poetry subs like Poetry Without Borders, which is a misnomer of the highest degree, because there are borders, and it's pretty easy to transgress them. So, yeah, it's not like that either. Like, we don't have pretension. Like, again, we don't have pretensions for what poetry is. We just write. We just write. At the same time, it's not just like talking about your feelings and shit. It's not on our poems where you just post 4 lines of like how depressed you are, or it's not OCP where every other poem is about how like you're depressed and how you want to commit suicide. It's like, what the fuck? Why are you guys? What are you doing? Just, just stop. Good gravy. Like, art is not therapeutic. Maybe that's a way to put it. It's not therapeutic. Like this stuff like music therapy and art therapy. Good gravy. Like that totally demoralizes the art, or what does it demoralize? It demeans art, right? To say that it's just therapy, to say that it's just like psychologically rejuvenating, refreshing. Jung would say he had the active imagination thing. He would counsel his whatever his clients to like draw out their thoughts, to just like get an intuition of something and then try to recreate it. But he would strenuously underline to them, saying that what they're doing is not art, right? Just because they're doing something imaginatively does not mean that they are then doing an artistic creation. He stressed that very much. Now, you could say that this implies that he didn't think that like spontaneous, unconscious generation wasn't art, but you also have to remember that these people were like really interested in their own psychic states, and so they came at it with biases to learn more about themselves, not really to uncover universal truths. And again, that's also something difficult to talk about, because again, I'm trying to say that this is not poetry. It's a convoluted topic. How do you talk about something that's not, How do you speak of a negative? It automatically is a positive. So, non-poetry. Yeah, so that's how it's different from other subs, if you're able to collect all that together. Yeah, and so as for content, as for what kind of poems, it's non-poems. Just something that's not like, okay, I have an idea of what poetry is, and I'm gonna perpetuate it, and I'm gonna shit on everything that's not like that. That's not what we're about. The clarity of the idea. I think ideas are fine. I think they're necessary to an extent, but the clarity of them, right? Kant said here that ideas have objects that don't exist. basically, that they're not real. Um, yeah, it's kind of like that then. We're chasing after things that aren't real. So that's why it's non-poetry. We'll just drop it there, right? We'll just stop with the all the bullshit. Okay, so and just bottom line, just to rehash, been wanting to make a different sub for a while because tired of the poetry bullshit, and I don't want to spend all my time on being frustrated on shitty poetry too, right? Because I'll post things, and Bradley's told me this too. I'm sure there are other people too who will post things that they generally think are good, or sorry, not good, but generally think are beautiful. That is the correct terminology when referring to art, right? It is beautiful. It cannot be good. Won't go into that. Won't go into that. Anyways, but we generally think that what we write is beautiful, and then when we post it, it gets no credit on shitty poetry, right? Because shitty poetry is about shit, right? And so that's understandable, right? And I'm tired of being frustrated about that, so I'm gonna save shitty poetry for shit, or for the occasional dirty poem, which they seem to like on there. And non-poetry will hopefully be the place where we can sort of expand on our artistic ideals. Okay, that was 12 minutes about-ish, so if you stuck all the way through it, that's nice of you. I'm not going to TLDR this in a short little snippet, so yeah. Have at it, lads and lasses and zasses and zads and whatever else, dogs and cats and